demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope for millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro stands on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, one that has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We've also come to this hollow spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legislative discontent will not pass until there's an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundation of our nation until the bright day of justice emerge. Now, there is something that I must say to my people who stand on a warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we cannot be guilty of wrongful deeds. We cannot seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high planes of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed the Negro community, must not lead to the mistrust of all white people. For by evidence of their presence here today, they have come to realize that their destiny is tied with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. And this offense that we share, mounted to storm the embattlements of injustice, must be carried forth by a biracial army. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we shall make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. And there are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied. We can never be satisfied as long as the basic mobility of the Negro is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied. We can never be satisfied until, as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We can never be satisfied. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York feels that he has nothing for which to vote. So no, we're not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Now, I'm not unmindful that many of you have come here out of excessive trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom have left you battered by the winds of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of created suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. So go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of the northern cities, knowing that this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in a valley of despair. And so I say to you, my friends, that even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream that's deeply rooted in the American dream, that one day this nation shall rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into a beautiful oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that one day, my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, that right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to hold hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every mountain made low, The rough places shall be made plain, and the crooked places shall be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that we go back to the South with. And with this faith, we'll be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we'll be able to work together, to study together, to pray together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with greater meaning. My country, tears of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. And when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it rain from every state and every village, from every city and every hamlet, we'll be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to stand up and sing in the words of that Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last.